Another situation in which you'll face this kind of scoped accessor and variable scope problem is when you're pushing to arrays. That's something we do quite often. And to illustrate that, let's do something like a map array, but we'll do it in a bit more complex fashion where we need an extra script to calculate the results of the map array. So when we do that, what we do is we'll do a set variable first, because we know we're going to build extra widgets, and the value will be an empty array. So we're initializing our array first. Notice that we still have our scope over there, and what we'll do now is we build the for loop. The counts will be however many elements there are in data, so that'll be state.self.data.length. Remember, this has to be curly braces because it's a number, and then we can do our actions. Let's give an ID to our for loop because we'll definitely need it. SF. And what we want to do is we want to push to extra widgets. So let's do a very simple case first. I'll just do my set state into extra widgets, which at the moment obviously is still empty. All right, so let's push into this variable now using our push variable. The name of the variable is extra widgets, and the value I want to push is just push a label. All right, so we're initializing our variable to an empty array, and then we're pushing to it. So when we run this, we'll see that it doesn't actually work. Now we open our script runner, state variables, and here you'll see we have S extra widgets and SF extra widgets, which has the two elements we need. Now, of course, this is because when we push the variable, we are trying to push to a variable inside our current scope, and our current scope is SF. So to get around that, we can also specify a scope for this push variable, the scope being S. So when we're pushing, we're telling it that the variable actually resides in a different scope. Now that works properly. We can do the same when we do this kind of scope override for set variable as well. And let's do that over here. So let's just change the scope initially to SF instead. Now we can remove it here because the variable is already set inside our scope. So the scope for extra widgets is now SF. So when we're here, we're pushing to ourselves. But now, of course, because we've set it in a different scope, we have to do scopedVariable.sf.extra widgets. Even though it does work in both ways, it's normally best to do it in the first way that we used, being this one. And that's because the variable we want to build and then access is ultimately being used in this main scope. It's only being built by the scope, but we want to use it here. So just keep it on the outside scope instead of making a new variable in a deeper scope and then trying to go through the scoped variable method over there. So let's now start using these values inside our label. So I'll do variable dot name. And now, of course, we need a scoped accessor because this value is in a deeper object. It's inside props, and props is inside value as well. So what we'll do is we'll use SF. We don't have variable name, obviously. We just have variable.row number. It's the only variable we have. So let's just start with row number to make sure that we can access that properly. So then we should see 0 and 1. Then we've got those. And now we can access the actual record. So what we'll do now is state.data. The element we want to access is this one, and I want to access the name. And of course, we need to access this through the scoped accessor as well, because it's still in a nested object. Even though it's not a variable, it's still an accessor. So we need to say sf.state.data. The specific index is defined by this one, and I want to access the name. does not work properly. So let's start debugging. Let's just first have a quick look. Oh, so we need the ID over there, state.self.data. That should fix it. All right. We can also define variables in here, use them in a similar way. Often when you want to do something like this, you'll want to access the record multiple times. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to set the variable called record, and the value will be basically this, but I want to access the entire object. So I'll do curly braces. So what we can do now is just change this whole thing to variable.record.name. Remember to go look into your variables in your script runner if you're wondering about things, so you can see what's happening internally.